The broadcast was live. That was the detail observer Kale would return to, again and again, in the weeks that followed, not the evidence, not the vote, not the form that was filed 4 hours later by 15 people who had never spoken to each other. The detail he kept returning to was that it was live, that every species in the cooperative watched it in real time, that the council president had known it was live and had done it anyway, which meant he had either not understood what he was doing or had understood, and had decided it didn't matter. And Kale's 30 years of military observation had made him very good at distinguishing between those two things. And what he saw in Verk's face when he signaled the guards was not the face of someone who didn't understand. It was the face of someone who had decided it didn't matter. Kale would think about that face for a long time. Envoy Mara Cole had been presenting for 11 minutes when Verk interrupted. 11 minutes out of the 40 she had been allocated, which was standard procedure for evidence presentations of significant scope, and which she had used with the specific, organized precision of someone who had prepared this presentation for 8 months, and understood that 11 of 40 minutes meant she was building towards something, that the structure of what she was saying required what came before it for what came after it to carry its full weight. She had been an emergency room doctor for 12 years before she became Earth's voice in the galaxy. Kale had read her file. 12 years of emergency medicine. The specific, high-pressure, life-or-death practice of someone who worked in the place where people arrived when everything else had failed to keep them alive, where the quality of your thinking and the speed of your decisions and the precision of your actions were measured in the most direct possible way, which was whether the person in front of you was alive at the end of your shift. 12 years of that had produced in Mara Cole the specific kind of mind that approached a presentation of evidence of genocide the way it approached a trauma case, with complete information, organized by priority, communicated with the clarity that the situation required, without embellishment, and without anything that wasn't essential. The evidence was complete. Kale had reviewed it afterward, all of it, the full 8 months of documentation that she had assembled through sources that the cooperative's own intelligence division had not managed to access, organized into a presentation that moved from the scale of the thing to the specificity of the thing, from 2 million deaths to individual names and individual medical records and individual survivor testimony, in the way that evidence of human atrocity needed to move to be understood as more than a number. She had been on the individual names when Verk interrupted. The evidence presented by Envoy Cole, Verk said, has been reviewed by the Council's Intelligence Committee and found to be, he paused, with the specific pause of someone selecting a word that they had prepared and were now deploying, inconsistent with verified data from the Veth Empire. Cole looked at him. The evidence is documented medical examinations of 2 million Sarathi dead, she said, conducted by independent physicians from 11 species over 14 months, the inconsistency the Intelligence Committee found. The evidence is fabricated, Verk said, clearly, into the live broadcast that was going to every diplomatic channel and news relay in cooperative space simultaneously. The chamber was quiet for a moment. I am a doctor, Cole said. Her voice had not changed. I have personally examined 43 Sarathi bodies. I have the examination reports. I have. You are a liar, Verk said. Kale, in his observer's position, was very still. He had been on the council for 30 years, and he had heard many things in many sessions, and he had learned to sit with things that required sitting with before responding to them. He was sitting with this. He was looking at the chamber, at 47 species watching their screens, at the Veth Ambassadors section, where the Veth Ambassador was watching Cole with the expression of someone observing a process they had arranged. And he was looking at Verk, and he was seeing the face he would keep returning to. The face of someone who had decided it didn't matter. Guards, Verk said. They came from the chamber's side entrance, two of them in the formal attire of council security, professional and unhurried. They crossed the chamber floor. They reached Cole at the evidence podium. She did not resist. She gathered her materials with the specific, deliberate care of someone who had decided that the only thing still within her control was how she conducted herself, and who had decided to conduct herself exactly as she always had. She picked up her evidence file. She put it under her arm. She turned toward the chamber exit. She passed Verk's position. She slowed, not stopped, slowed, and she said something. Quietly. Directly to him, close enough that it was only for him and the people immediately adjacent, not the room, not the broadcast. She said it and she kept walking and the guards escorted her out and the chamber doors closed. Verk's expression did not change. He had not clearly heard what she said. This would matter later. The people immediately adjacent to Verk had heard. They went pale. Cale noted this, too, of Verk's senior aides, both of whom had been on the council long enough to have institutional knowledge of things that most current members did not have institutional knowledge of. They went pale in the specific way of people who have heard something and immediately understood what it meant, and what it meant was not small. Cale filed this observation in the same place. He filed other observations that seemed significant before he knew why they were significant. In the part of his 30 years of professional attention that held things until they became relevant. The session continued. The Veth ambassador gave a response address that characterized Cole's presentation as a fabrication motivated by political interests, which was the characterization that the Intelligence Committee's finding had made available to him, and which he delivered with the confident precision of someone who had prepared it in advance. The council voted. The evidence was rejected. The session moved to the next agenda item. The Veth ambassador smiled. Cale watched him smile and noted it and put it with the other observations and went back to his work. James Reeves was in his office at Earth Fleet Command when the broadcast reached him. He was not watching it in the way of someone who had planned to watch it. He had a secondary screen running the council feed at low priority, the way he always had a secondary screen running the council feed when Mara was presenting, because she was his younger sister, and she had been presenting to the council for 3 years, and he had watched every presentation from the beginning, from his office, quietly. Without telling her, he was watching because she didn't need to know, and because watching was his way of being present for something he could not be physically present for. He watched the 11 minutes. He watched Verk say fabricated and then liar. He watched the guards. He watched Mara gather her materials with that specific, deliberate care that he recognized as hers, that quality she had developed in 12 years of emergency medicine, the capacity to be completely composed in a situation that was not composed, to do the thing that needed doing exactly as it needed to be done regardless of what was happening around it. He watched her cross the chamber floor and slow near Verk, and say the thing he couldn't hear through the broadcast and keep walking. He watched the chamber doors close. He sat in his office for approximately 90 seconds. He was not thinking exactly, not in the way that thinking was a conscious process of weighing options and arriving at conclusions. He was doing something more like seeing. The way you saw things when the thing in front of you was clear enough that understanding it didn't require thought. It required only the willingness to see it. He opened his desk drawer. The form was there. He had known it was there. It had been there for the 6 years he had held this command, put there by his predecessor, who had received it from their predecessor, in the chain of custodianship that Earth's military had maintained for 60 years for a document that had been created once and never used. He had read it once, when he first took command, in the way that a new commander read everything that the office contained to know what was there. He knew what was there. He took it out, he filled it out. His hands were steady, not with the steadiness of suppressed emotion, but the steadiness of someone doing a thing that the situation required and doing it correctly. The form had 7 fields. He completed all 7. He noted the authorizing event. He noted the time. He signed it. He filed it electronically, The form had a filing system, dormant for 60 years, which activated when he submitted. He watched the confirmation appear on his screen. He put the physical form back in the drawer. He went back to work. He did not call anyone. He did not send a message to Mara. He did not issue a statement or notify anyone above him in the chain of command, because the form did not require any of those things, and because what the form required was what he had done, which was fill it out and file it when the authorizing event occurred. The authorizing event had occurred. He had filed the form. That was the complete set of actions the situation required of him at this moment. He went back to work. The form's automatic routing system, dormant for 60 years, processed his submission and began its routing sequence. It cross-referenced his submission against the authorization criteria, 6 separate criteria, all of which had to be met for the routing to proceed. It checked each one. It confirmed each one. It routed the notification to the appropriate recipient, Earth's civilian government, the specific office that held the receiving authority for this form. Subject line: Extermination Protocol authorization pending. Then it waited for additional submissions. It did not have to wait long. Commander Yale Santos filed at 13:47, 90 minutes after the broadcast ended. She was stationed on a patrol vessel in Sector 9 and had watched the broadcast on her personal device during her lunch break and had sat very still for a few minutes and then filed the form from her personal terminal. General Marcus Webb filed at 14:12. He was at a conference on New Dublin Station and had excused himself from the afternoon session and found a private office and filed the form and returned to the conference. Captain Alina Reyes filed at 14:51, Colonel James Park at 15:03, Admiral Constance Ose at 15:21, Commander David Morrison at 15:34. They did not call each other. They had not coordinated. Each of them had watched the same broadcast, alone or with their immediate staff, and each of them had done the same thing, not identically, not simultaneously, but within the 4-hour window that the form's routing system tracked, filing the same form, for the same reason, from the same place in themselves that had been reached by the same broadcast. By 1800, 14 additional forms had been submitted. 15 in total. 15 humans who had seen the same thing and had independently arrived at the same form, filed within 4 hours of the event, without coordination, without discussion, with the specific completeness of people who had seen something clearly and had known what it required. The routing system processed all 15. It confirmed all 15 met the authorization criteria. It sent 15 simultaneous notifications to Earth's civilian government. The civilian government's duty officer received the notifications at 18:03, opened the first one, read the subject line, and called the duty secretary, who called the relevant minister, who called the prime minister. The prime minister read the subject line. The protocol had not been activated in 60 years. The civilian government's receiving authority, the specific office that held this responsibility, had been maintained in the way that Earth maintained things that might be needed even if they were never used, with the specific institutional seriousness of people who had decided that having the capacity was the important thing, not the intention to use it. The Prime Minister called an emergency cabinet meeting. The cabinet met for 3 hours. At the end of 3 hours, the Prime Minister filed the civilian authorization. The protocol's 72-hour window began. Observer Kale found the flag 3 days later. It came through his routine intelligence review, the daily digest of unusual activity in member species' military administrative systems, a document he read every morning with the specific attention of someone who had been reading it for 30 years and had learned to distinguish between the unusual that was consequential and the unusual that was noise. Most of it was noise. The flag from Earth's military administrative system was in the middle of the digest. between a report on Velhanak maintenance schedules and a Marin diplomatic communication pattern analysis. He almost moved past it. The flag was small, unusual activity in an administrative subsystem that had been dormant for 60 years, reactivated, processing submissions, sending routing notifications. Administrative, dormant subsystem. These were the words of noise. He almost moved past it. Something stopped him. Not a specific instinct, more like the absence of the specific sense of irrelevance that noise produced, the sense that this was in a different category from the items around it without yet knowing which category. He flagged it for follow-up. He continued reading. He came back to it after breakfast. He pulled the flag, looked at the subsystem, searched Earth's military doctrine archive for the subsystem's function, found the associated document. 3 pages, 60 years old, titled Extermination Protocol, Doctrine and Authorization Procedures. He read it. He read the first page, which described the protocol's purpose and scope. He read the second page, which described the authorization procedure, the form, the criteria, the routing, the 72-hour window. He read the third page, which described the operational parameters. He sat very still for a long time. Then he called his senior analyst, Commander Yira, and said, "I need everything we have on human military capability and positioning. Everything. Right now. Not the summary files, everything." Yira said, "That's going to take a few hours." "I'll be here," Kale said. He read the protocol again while he waited. The third page was the one he kept returning to. The operational parameters, the scope, the specific, comprehensive, enumerated list of target categories, military, economic, political, infrastructure, communication, governance, and the specific language used to describe what the protocol was designed to accomplish. The Extermination Protocol is a full-spectrum coordinated operation designed to eliminate, within a 72-hour operational window, the capacity of a designated entity to function as a coherent civilization. The protocol does not target civilian populations. The protocol targets every system that allows a civilization to govern, supply, defend, or organize itself. The intent is not destruction of life, but elimination of organized function, the removal of every capacity that allows a governing structure to maintain its authority or conduct coordinated action. He read it a second time. The protocol was developed from Earth's own historical experience, with governing structures that had become irreparably corrupted, structures that could not be reformed from within because the mechanisms of reform were controlled by the structure itself. The protocol reflects the understanding that in such circumstances, the only solution that has historically produced lasting change is the elimination of the structure's capacity to function, followed by the reconstruction of governance from the population that remains. He read it a third time. Then he read the authorization section again. The criteria, 6 of them, specific, measurable, including the requirement that the authorizing event involve an action by the target entity that violated a defined threshold of institutional conduct in a manner that was publicly documented. He looked at the threshold definition. He looked at the broadcast from 3 days ago. He called Verk's office. It was midnight. He said, "I need to speak with the president tonight. It cannot wait." Verk's chief of staff said the president was unavailable. Kale said, "Tell him Observer Kale found something in Earth's military archives that he needs to see before morning. Tell him those exact words. If he still says tonight is unavailable, that is his decision, and the record will reflect I made this call." He was connected to Verk in 4 minutes. He presented the protocol to the full council 2 days later, 48 hours after his midnight call to Verk, which was the time it had taken to complete his intelligence review and prepare the full briefing. He asked for an emergency session. He was given one because Verk had read the protocol and had made the calculation correctly that an emergency session was better than not having one. The chamber was full. Kale stood at the evidence podium, the same podium Mara Cole had stood at 6 days ago, and he presented what he had found. He started with the form. He explained the authorization process, the 15 independent submissions within 4 hours, the civilian government authorization, the 72-hour window. He was factual, precise, and careful not to add interpretation to fact. The facts were sufficient. He presented the protocol's scope. He read the 3rd page of the doctrine document aloud, slowly, because the council needed to hear it in the way that documents needed to be heard to be understood as real, not as an abstraction on a screen, but as words in the air of the room. He read the target categories. He read the 72-hour operational window. Then he presented what he had found when he had spent 2 days examining human military assets in cooperative space. 60 days ago, he said, these positions were empty. He activated the display, a map of cooperative space with Earth's known military deployments marked in blue and a second set of markers in red that had not been in any intelligence file until he found them. Today, these positions are occupied by human vessels that were not previously in our tracking systems. He paused. 614 vessels, positioned across 47 locations. He let the room look at the map for a moment. My analysts have reviewed the geometry of these positions. The assessment is, he looked at his notes, because he wanted to be precise about the wording, not defensive, not offensive in the standard sense, preparatory. The positions form a specific geometric relationship to the target infrastructure of any of the entities that would meet the protocol's designation criteria for the authorizing event we are reviewing. He paused. I want to be clear about what I am saying. I am saying that Earth moved 614 vessels into positions that make sense if you are planning the protocol's operational phase. I am saying these vessels were not in our tracking systems, which means they moved into these positions without being detected by any cooperative monitoring system. And I am saying I found them only because I was specifically looking for them. The chamber was quiet. I want to address the question I expect is forming, Kale continued. Whether this is a demonstration of capability or an actual operational deployment. I have asked myself this question for 2 days. I want to share my conclusion, which is that I cannot answer it with certainty, and that the inability to answer it with certainty is itself significant. He looked at the chamber. In 30 years of military observation, I have reviewed demonstrations of capability by member species attempting to influence council decisions. Demonstrations have specific characteristics. They are visible, they are announced, they are accompanied by statements of capability. What I found is not visible. It was hidden until I specifically looked. It is not announced. Earth has made no statement about these vessels. It is not accompanied by capability claims. He paused. What I found is a preparation that was not designed to be seen. That is different from a demonstration. Verk said, "This is a bluff. Human capability has been assessed. They do not have the capacity to execute an operation of this scope." Kale looked at him. He had prepared for this. He had known it was coming because it was the conclusion that the assessment files supported, and because it was the conclusion that would be most comfortable for the council to reach, and because comfortable conclusions were the ones that required the most careful examination. "Sir," he said, "I believed the same thing when I began this review. I want to tell you what changed my belief." He activated a secondary display, the sensor data from the 614 vessels, the specific energy signatures his analysts had spent 2 days examining. These vessels' power profiles are outside the parameters of any human military vessel in our classification database, not slightly outside, significantly. The readings suggest drive technology and weapons capability that our assessment files do not account for. He paused. I asked Earth's military liaison for an explanation. The liaison said, and I am quoting directly, "We'll discuss our capabilities when we're ready to discuss them." That response, combined with 614 untracked vessels in preparatory positions with unclassified energy profiles, is the basis of my assessment. He held Verk's gaze. I don't think it's a bluff, sir. I think it's a promise, and I think there's a difference. The chamber was very quiet. The 72-hour window, said the Velhari representative. How much time remains? 31 hours, Kale said. Mara Cole's transmission request came in at 1400. The council's communication staff routed it to Verk. He looked at the request for a moment. He thought about the options available, refusing, delaying, accepting. He did the calculation that 31 hours and 614 untracked vessels and a 3-page protocol required, and he said, "Give her the channel." She appeared on the main screen. The same composed, precise quality she had always had. The same direct at the camera eye contact. The same complete absence of performance. She was not presenting herself as anything. She was simply herself, which was a doctor and a diplomat and someone who had spent 8 months documenting a genocide and had been called a liar on live broadcast for it. I want to address what Observer Kale found, she said, because I think some things need to be said directly, and I think I should be the one to say them. She paused. The protocol is real. It has been real for 60 years. We created it because we understood from our own history that sometimes a governing structure becomes so corrupted, so captured by the interests of the powerful at the expense of the people it is supposed to serve, that the only solution is to remove its capacity to function and rebuild. We have a great deal of historical experience with this, more than we would prefer. She paused. We included the protocol in our military doctrine submission 60 years ago because we believe in transparency about what we are capable of. We hoped we would never need it. We believed, when we joined the cooperative, that the cooperative's institutions were worth the trust we were placing in them. Another pause, smaller. We were testing that belief 8 days ago when I presented evidence of a genocide to this council, evidence I had assembled over 8 months. Evidence that included the names and medical records of 2 million dead people. She looked at the chamber, at all of it, at every species present. I was called a liar. I was removed from this chamber by guards on live broadcast, while the representatives of the people responsible watched and smiled. She looked at Verk specifically. The look lasted long enough to be its own kind of statement. The protocol was filed by 15 humans independently, within 4 hours of that broadcast, without coordination, because they watched what happened and understood what it meant, she said. Not what it meant politically. What it meant, the thing it was. Evidence of genocide documented by 11 species of independent physicians, rejected by a governing body that has a relationship with the perpetrators that it values more than the truth. And the person presenting the evidence called a liar and removed by guards. She paused. I am here to tell you what the protocol requires to be withdrawn, not what we demand, what the protocol requires. The distinction matters. The chamber was completely still. 3 things, she said. First, formal council recognition of the Sarathi genocide. The evidence is in the record. 11 species of independent physicians documented it. 2 million people are dead. The Council's Intelligence Committee finding does not change what the physicians documented. Recognition is the acknowledgement of what is already true. She paused. Second, removal of the Veth Empire from the Council. The Council's foundational documents specify that membership requires a commitment to specific standards of conduct toward other species. The Veth Empire has failed that standard by a measure of 2 million dead. Removal is the application of an existing standard. She paused again. Third, a formal accountability process for conduct during the session 8 days ago. Not a specific outcome, a process. A transparent, documented review of whether the conduct of this council's leadership during that session met the standards the council claims to hold. She looked at Verk one more time. These 3 things, completed within the remaining 31 hours of the protocol window, the protocol is withdrawn. Not because Earth wins something, because the things that need to happen happen and the protocol's authorization criteria are no longer met. She paused. If they do not happen, the protocol proceeds. Not because we want it to. Not because we are angry. Because 15 humans filed a form and the form has a window and the window is running, and we do not file forms we are not prepared to honor. She looked at the camera one final time. The protocol was never a threat, she said. It was a promise. We made that promise 60 years ago when we included it in our doctrine submission. We have kept every promise we have ever made. Observer Kale can verify this. It is in the record. She paused. I am a doctor. I spent 12 years in emergency medicine. I understand the difference between a system that is recoverable and a system that has failed past recovery. This council is not past recovery. That is why the protocol requires 3 things instead of proceeding directly. That is why the 3 things are about the Sarathi, the people who are already dead, rather than about anything that benefits Earth. She let that sit for a moment. That is the distinction that matters. We did not file the protocol for ourselves. We filed it because 2 million people are dead and the institution that is supposed to care about that demonstrated 8 days ago that it did not. She was done. The window is running. The transmission ended. The chamber did not produce the silence it had produced after previous significant moments. The 3-minute silence after the previous day's intelligence briefing. The longer silence of the broadcast 8 days ago. What it produced was something more like the sound of an institution doing the thing institutions did when they were confronted with the specific, unambiguous clarity of a choice that had consequences they could not manage if they made the wrong one. It was not a comfortable sound. It was the sound of 47 species doing the calculation that the situation required. 31 hours and 614 vessels and 3 things, and a 15-person form that had been filed without coordination, and a window that was running, and a doctor who had said we do not file forms we are not prepared to honor, and a 60-year record that was, as she had said, available for verification. Kale sat in his observer's position and listened to the chamber calculate. The Veth ambassador's section was very quiet. Kale watched the ambassador, watched him listen to the transmission, watched the playback of the evidence presentation, read something on his personal device that Kale's angle could not identify. He watched the ambassador's expression go through several things in the space of a few minutes, and arrive at something that Kale recognized as the expression of a person recalculating a situation, and finding that the recalculation produced a different answer than the original. The Veth ambassador had believed, 8 days ago, that the council's rejection of Cole's evidence was the end of the situation, that the arrangement, the relationship between his empire and the council's leadership that had made the rejection possible, was sufficient to manage whatever response Earth produced. He had believed this because he had studied Earth's responses to previous situations and had assessed them as within the manageable range. He had not studied the protocol. Kale was fairly certain of this, because if the Veth ambassador had studied the protocol, he would not have smiled when Cole was removed from the chamber. The vote was called 4 hours after Cole's transmission. Verk had run the calculation and had determined that 4 hours was the minimum time required for the procedural formality of calling a vote, and that calling the vote was the only path available to him that did not end with the protocol proceeding. 44-3. The 3 were the Veth Empire's closest allies species that had relationships with the Veth Empire that they valued more than the evidence of 2 million dead people, or that had their own reasons for not wanting the accountability process that the third of Cole's requirements established, or that were making a calculation about the political cost of the yes vote that led them to the no vote despite everything else. They were 3 of 47. They were very alone. The council formally recognized the Sarathi genocide. The recognition was entered into the permanent record with the evidence Cole had presented, all 8 months of it, all 11 species of independent physicians, all the names and medical records and survivor testimony. The Intelligence Committee's finding of fabrication was also entered into the record, adjacent to the evidence, because the record was complete or it was not the record. The Veth Empire was removed from the council. The ambassador received the notification on his personal device in the chamber. He read it. He stood and walked out. He did not look at anyone as he left. Kale watched him go and thought about the smile and about the calculation that had produced the smile and about how different the calculation looked now from how it had looked 8 days ago. The accountability process for council conduct was established. The specific form of it, the timeline, the independence requirements, negotiated in 3 hours of procedural work that Kale observed from his position, with the attention of someone who had been watching institutions do this work for 30 years, and who understood that the doing of it was as important as the outcome it was supposed to produce. James Reeves filed the withdrawal form at 22:47, with 19 hours remaining in the window. His hands were as steady as they had been when he filed the original. The form had a withdrawal field. It had been designed with a withdrawal field, because the people who had designed it 60 years ago had understood that the value of the protocol was not in its use, but in its existence, and that the existence required a withdrawal procedure to be complete. He completed the withdrawal field. He filed it. He watched the confirmation appear. He put the form back in the drawer. He did not call Mara. He would see her in a few days. There was time. The withdrawal was confirmed by the routing system at 22:49. The notification went to Earth's civilian government. The Prime Minister's office confirmed receipt. The protocol's window closed. 614 vessels that the cooperative had not known existed began their repositioning. Quietly, without announcement, the way they had arrived. Kale wrote his report over the following week. He had been writing reports for 30 years, and this was the most important report he had ever written, and he gave it the time that it required, which was a week of careful, comprehensive work. The report was 200 pages. It covered the evidence presentation, the vote, the form, the protocol's history and doctrine, his intelligence findings, the transmission, the council's vote, the withdrawal. It was thorough and it was honest, including the sections on his own intelligence failure, the 614 vessels that had not been in any file until he specifically looked, the assessment that had told him human capability did not extend to protocol scope, and that had been wrong. The last paragraph was short. He wrote it last because he had learned in 30 years of writing reports that the last paragraph was the place where you said the essential thing. The thing that all the preceding pages had been building toward, the thing that the reader should carry when they had finished reading. He wrote it once. He did not revise it. Humanity created a weapon 60 years ago that they hoped they would never use. When their diplomat was publicly humiliated while presenting evidence of genocide, 15 humans independently filed the authorization, without coordination, without being asked, without anger, because they saw what happened and understood what it required. They then offered to withdraw it for 3 things, none of which benefited humanity directly. All 3 were about the people who were already dead. Earth does not threaten. Earth does not bluff. Earth makes promises and Earth keeps them. The protocol was never the weapon. The keeping of promises is the weapon. He submitted the report. He sat for a while afterward. He thought about 30 years of observation and about the thing he had spent those 30 years trying to understand, which was not the capability. Capability was measurable, documentable, the subject of assessment files and intelligence reviews, but the character, the specific thing underneath the capability that determined what the capability was used for. He had been trying to understand it for 30 years. He had understood it finally. From 3 pages of doctrine written 60 years ago and 15 forms filed without coordination in 4 hours by people who had watched a broadcast alone and had done the same thing independently, without being asked. The protocol was never the weapon. The keeping of promises is the weapon. He read his last paragraph one more time. He thought it was right. He submitted the report. Myra went to the Sarathi Memorial on a Thursday. The memorial was on the cooperative's humanitarian station, a permanent installation that the council had maintained for 40 years, built originally to honor the victims of the Velthari extinction and expanded since to hold the records of other events that the cooperative's history contained, and that the record needed to contain. The Sarathi section had been added 11 days ago, after the vote, in the specific procedural way that the memorial staff worked, careful, comprehensive, with the understanding that what they were doing mattered and deserved to be done correctly. 2 million names. The memorial Sarathi section was larger than any previous edition, larger than the Velthari section, larger than the 3 sections that predated it. 2 million names in the specific format. The memorial used name, age, place of origin, date of death, in the order that the evidence file had organized them, which was the order that 11 species of independent physicians had documented them, which was the order that was as close to chronological as the documentation allowed. Mara walked through the section for a long time. She was not reading. 2 million names were not readable in a single visit, or in many visits. They were a quantity that exceeded what attention could hold, and that existed at a scale that required something other than reading to apprehend. She was walking through them the way you walk through something that needed to be understood by being present in it. She stopped at the beginning of the section. The first name, the first documented case, a Sarathi elder, age 92, from a settlement in the Sarathi's northern continent. She had his medical examination report in her evidence file. She had read it many times. She stood in front of his name for a while. Then she walked to the end of the section. The last name, the most recently documented, a Sarathi child, age 4, from a coastal settlement. She had her medical examination report too. She had read it once and had not read it again, because some things you read once and put in the record and carry differently from the things you could return to. She walked back to the entrance of the section. She took her evidence file, the physical copy, the complete documentation, 8 months of work bound into 3 volumes, and she placed it at the base of the memorial Sarathi section. There was a designated space there, the memorial staff had told her, for the primary documentation associated with each section. She placed it carefully. She stepped back. She stood there for a long time. The humanitarian station was quiet at this hour, late, the station's artificial light in the amber of evening cycle, the memorial section empty except for her. She was a doctor. She had stood in rooms with the dead before, not like this, not 2 million, but in the way that emergency medicine required you to stand with the fact of death and continue working, because the work was what you had, and the work was what the living required of you. She stood there until the station's light shifted to night cycle. She did not speak. She did not cry, not because the grief was not there, but because she had been carrying it for 8 months and had learned what shape it took in her, and the shape it took was not tears. The shape it took was 8 months of work and 3 volumes of documentation, and the specific steadiness with which she had presented that documentation, and gathered it carefully when she was removed from the chamber, and said what she had said quietly to Verk as she passed him. She had said, "Earth remembers everything." He hadn't caught it, that was all right. The council had learned it the other way. She turned and walked to the memorial's exit. She had a transmission to make tomorrow, the accountability process's first session which she had been asked to address. She had notes to review. She had work to do. She was a doctor. She had 12 years of emergency medicine and 3 years of diplomacy and 8 months of genocide documentation, and the specific understanding, built from all of it, that the work was what you had, and the work was what you did, and the work was what made the difference between the thing that needed to happen and the thing that didn't happen. The protocol was never the weapon. The keeping of promises is the weapon. She walked out of the memorial into the station's evening and thought about what came next, which was the accountability process and the Sarathi survivors and the long, imperfect, necessary work of what the council became after this. And she thought about what that work required of her, which was the same thing it had always required. To show up, to document, to present the evidence, to say what was true precisely with the care it deserved as many times as it needed to be said. She had done that once already and had been called a liar for it. She was going to do it again. That was the thing about promises. You kept them, not because the keeping was easy or because it cost nothing or because the people you were keeping them to were watching and would notice. You kept them because you had made them, and the making was the commitment, and the commitment was the thing you were, and you were what you were regardless of whether anyone was watching. Earth remembered everything, including how to keep a promise, including 2 million names on a wall that the record now contained, permanently, completely, in the way of things that had been documented by people who understood that the record was what lasted when everything else was done. The memorial stood in the station's night. The names were there. The 3 volumes of documentation were at the base of the section where they belonged. The window had closed. The protocol had been withdrawn. 15 humans had filed a form without coordination and had been prepared to honor it and had not needed to because the 3 things had happened, and the 3 things were about the people who were already dead, and that was the distinction that mattered. Cale's report was in the record. His last paragraph was in the record. The keeping of promises is the weapon. The galaxy was reading it, would keep reading it. In the way that the record worked, the permanent, accumulated, indelible record of what had happened and what it meant, it would be read for as long as the record was maintained, which was as long as there were people for whom the record mattered. Earth had always been one of those people. That was not a new thing. That was the thing that 60 years of observation had been trying to understand, and that 3 pages of 60-year-old doctrine had finally made clear. Earth remembered everything. Everything was in the record. The record was the promise, and the promise had been kept.